The dust settled on the vacant street as Delilah Prescott clutched her father's blood-stained pocket watch, the last reminder of a life she once knew. Aurora, Colorado, 1878, a town that had taken everything from her, yet somehow kept her bound to its unforgiving soil like a prisoner serving a sentence she never deserved. Delilah's once vibrant auburn hair hung lifelessly around her face as she trudged toward her family's dilapidated ranch house. 3 years ago, it had been a place of warmth and promise. Now it stood as a hollow reminder of shattered dreams. The drought had killed their cattle. Bandits had killed her father. And slowly, day by day, Aurora was killing her spirit. The cattle ranch her father had built from nothing was nearly gone now. Delilah had managed to hold onto the land by taking in laundry and mending for the townsfolk who once respected her family name. Now they offered her only pitying glances and whispered rumors behind her back. "Miss Prescott." Old Mrs. Winters called from across the street. "Have you heard? The railroad's sending surveyors. They say the new line might run right through Aurora." Delilah nodded politely but felt nothing. The railroad meant progress, prosperity even. Once, such news would have sent her heart soaring with possibilities. Now it was just another change in a world that had stopped mattering. As she neared the edge of town, the sound of hammering drew her attention to Gunderson's general store. A tall figure balanced on a ladder, repairing the weathered sign that had hung crooked since last winter's blizzard. A stranger, his broad shoulders, and the easy way he handled the tools suggested a man accustomed to hard work. His worn Stetson shaded his face, but she could make out a strong jawline dusted with stubble. Delilah looked away quickly. New faces in Aurora rarely meant good news for her. The last stranger who'd shown interest in her land had been a banker's agent with forged documents and a silver tongue. It had taken 3 months of legal battles to keep her property. She continued past the store, quickening her pace when she heard the ladder creak and footsteps follow. "Madam," the voice was deep, with a hint of Texas in its cadence. "You dropped this." Delilah turned reluctantly. The stranger held out her handkerchief, a simple cotton square embroidered with her mother's careful stitches. He was taller up close, with eyes the color of a summer storm and smile lines that suggested he laughed often. "Thank you," she said curtly, taking the handkerchief without meeting his eyes. "Name's Ethan Yates," he said, tipping his hat. "Just rode in yesterday, hired on to help with some repairs around town before the railroad folks arrive." "Welcome to Aurora, Mr. Yates," Delilah replied, her voice hollow with practiced politeness. "If you'll excuse me." She turned away, but his voice followed her. "Would it be too forward to ask your name, madam?" Delilah hesitated. "Prescott, Delilah Prescott." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "The Prescott Ranch. I heard it was a fine spread once." "Once," she echoed, the single word carrying the weight of all she'd lost. "I'd be happy to take a look at your place," he offered. "If there are repairs needed, there are many things broken at Prescott Ranch, Mr. Yates," she interrupted, a flash of anger warming her voice for the first time. "Not all of them can be fixed with a hammer and nails." She left him standing there, feeling his eyes on her back as she walked away. She didn't need another man's empty promises. Aurora had taught her that lesson well enough. The next morning, Delilah woke before dawn as usual. The ranch house creaked and sighed around her, a constant reminder of its slow decay. She dressed quickly in her faded work dress and headed to the barn. 2 milk cows, 3 chickens, and an ancient mare named Penny were all that remained of her father's once proud herd. After finishing her chores, she loaded her wagon with the week's laundry. Mrs. Hollister's fine linens needed special attention, and Judge Parker's shirts always required extra starch. It was honest work, but a far cry from the life she'd once imagined for herself. As she guided the wagon into town, she saw a small crowd gathered outside the telegraph office. The stagecoach had arrived early, bringing mail and whatever news existed beyond Aurora's dusty borders. Sheriff Mills spotted her and waved her over. "Miss Prescott, thought you should hear this directly. Railroad surveyors will be here by month's end. They're considering two possible routes. One would cut through the north edge of town, the other would go through my property," she finished for him, her voice steady despite the dread pooling in her stomach. "Now, it's not decided yet," the sheriff said quickly. "But if they choose that southern route, they'd make you a fair offer. Might be a blessing in disguise, considering she was a woman alone, failing to maintain a ranch too big for her capabilities." The words hung unspoken between them. "Thank you for the information, Sheriff," she said, gathering her reins. As she turned the wagon, she spotted Ethan Yates emerging from the telegraph office, deep in conversation with Mayor Burnside. Their eyes met briefly before she snapped the reins and drove on. For 3 days, Delilah threw herself into her work, ignoring the whispers about the railroad and what it might mean for her future. On the 4th morning, she found Ethan Yates leaning against her fence post, his sleeves rolled up and a toolbox at his feet. "Mr. Yates," she acknowledged coolly, "you're trespassing." He straightened, removing his hat. "Miss Prescott, I noticed your north fence line is down, thought I might offer my services. I don't recall requesting help." "No, madam, you didn't." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "But that fence won't fix itself and your cattle might wander." "I have 2 cows, Mr. Yates. They're not exactly a stampede risk. Still," he gestured to the broken posts, "it's an easy fix for me. Might take you days." Delilah studied him, suspicion warring with practical necessity. The fence did need repair, and she had 6 dresses to finish hemming by sundown. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why what, Miss Prescott? Why help me? What do you want in return?" Something flashed across his face, not offense at her bluntness, but a flicker of understanding. "Coffee, maybe." "If you're offering." Despite herself, Delilah felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. "I have coffee. Black and bitter like most things in Aurora." "Just how I like it," he replied, his own smile warming his weathered face. She left him to the fence and returned to the house, periodically watching through the window as he worked efficiently, replacing broken posts and tightening wire. By midday, she brought him coffee in her father's old tin mug. "You're not just passing through, are you, Mr. Yates?" she asked as he accepted the cup gratefully. He took a slow sip before answering. "No, madam. I've been looking for somewhere to settle. Heard Aurora might be growing with the railroad coming. So you're an opportunist." His eyes met hers steadily. "I'm a man looking for a fresh start." "Aren't most people who come west?" "And what are you starting fresh from, Mr. Yates?" "War," he said simply. "Cattle drives, drifting. 10 years is a long time to have no place to call home." Delilah knew she should leave it at that, maintain the distance she kept with everyone in Aurora. But something in his direct gaze made her continue. "You fought for the Union or the Confederacy?" "Union. Illinois Regiment. But that's not the war that haunts me." He set down the coffee cup. "The one against the memories, that's the harder fight." The quiet honesty in his voice resonated with something deep inside her. For a moment, Delilah felt the familiar walls she'd built around herself waver. "The fence looks good," she said finally, changing the subject. "Thank you." "My pleasure, Miss Prescott." He handed back the empty cup. "If you've got other repairs need doing, I'm available." She should have politely declined. Instead, she heard herself say, "The barn roof leaks something terrible. I've put out buckets, but—" "Tomorrow," he promised, "I'll bring what's needed." True to his word, Ethan arrived the next morning with planks of wood and roofing materials loaded in a borrowed wagon. Delilah found herself watching him work throughout the day, his sure movements and focused attention a stark contrast to the chaos that had defined her life for so long. By late afternoon, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Ethan worked faster, clearly trying to finish before the rain came. Delilah brought him water and found herself lingering. "Will you stay in Aurora if the railroad chooses the northern route?" she asked. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Likely. Work follows the railroad, though I've heard there's good land south of here that might be available for homesteading." "Is that what you want? Your own ranch, a man needs purpose," he said thoughtfully. "Land gives you that. Something to build, to care for." He looked around at her property. "Your father understood that, I'd wager." The mention of her father sent a familiar pain through her chest. He did. This land was everything to him. "And to you?" the question caught her off guard. "It's all I have left of him," she answered honestly. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and fat raindrops began to fall. Ethan secured the last section of roofing and climbed down as the sky opened up. They ran for the porch, arriving breathless as rain pounded the newly repaired roof. "Perfect timing," she said, pushing wet hair from her face. Ethan stood close, rain dripping from his hat brim. "Miss Prescott," he began, then hesitated. "Delilah." You should go," she interrupted, suddenly uncomfortable with his proximity, with the way his presence made her feel less hollow. "Before the roads get too muddy." Disappointment flashed across his face, but he nodded. "The roof should hold now, but I'll check it again after the storm passes." He turned to leave, but Delilah found herself reaching out, touching his arm lightly. "Mr. Yates, Ethan, thank you, not just for the roof." Their eyes held for a long moment before he nodded again, understanding what she couldn't bring herself to say aloud. He stepped into the rain and was gone, leaving Delilah with the unfamiliar sensation of something shifting inside her, something she'd thought was permanently broken. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan became a regular presence at the ranch. He repaired the sagging porch steps, reinforced the chicken coop, and cleared the irrigation ditch that had become clogged with years of neglect. Each day, Delilah found herself looking forward to his arrival, though she tried to convince herself it was merely appreciation for the improvements to her property. The town noticed their arrangement. Whispers followed Delilah as she delivered laundry or purchased supplies at Gunderson's store. She ignored them, as she'd learned to ignore most of Aurora's gossip. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and crimson, Ethan asked about her father. "He was a dreamer," she said after a long silence. "Came west with nothing but determination and my mother's unwavering faith in him. Built this place board by board while I was still small enough to ride on his shoulders. And your mother died of fever when I was 12. Father never really recovered, though he tried to hide it for my sake." Delilah traced the grain of the wooden porch rail with her fingertip. "He poured everything into this ranch after that. It was his memorial to her in a way." "And then you lost him too," Ethan said softly. 3 years ago, rustlers came in the night. He confronted them." Her voice grew distant. "Sheriff found him the next morning. They'd taken our best cattle, nearly 50 head, left him in the dirt like he was nothing." Ethan's hand covered hers, warm and solid. "He wasn't nothing. Neither are you, Delilah." The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. She pulled her hand away. "It doesn't matter now. The ranch is failing. The bank has been patient, but eventually. You could sell to the railroad, start fresh somewhere, and go where? Do what?" She stood abruptly. "This land is all I know, all I have left." "You have more than you realize," he said, rising to stand beside her. "You have strength, determination, the same qualities that brought your parents west." Pretty words, Ethan, but they don't feed cattle or pay bank notes. He stepped closer. Let me help you, not just with repairs. We could work this land together, make it profitable again. Why would you do that? She asked, her voice barely audible. Because I've watched you fight for this place. Because every day I spend here, I see more of what it could be again. His eyes held hers. Because when I'm with you, Delilah, I feel like I've finally found what I've been searching for. The honesty in his expression terrified her. She'd buried hope so deeply, protected herself so carefully, that his words felt like a threat to the walls she'd built. You don't know me, she whispered. I know enough, he countered. I know you wake before dawn to care for animals that barely provide enough to justify their feed. I know you work your fingers raw doing other people's laundry rather than admit defeat. I know you still leave flowers on both your parents' graves every Sunday. Tears welled in her eyes. Stop. I know you're afraid to believe in anything good because everything you've loved has been taken from you. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing her cheek with a gentleness that made her breath catch. But Delilah, not everything ends in loss. She stepped back, shaking her head. I think you should go, Ethan, and I think it's best if you don't come back. Pain flickered across his face. If that's what you truly want. It is, she lied, her voice stronger than she felt. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Thank you for the coffee and conversation, Miss Prescott. I hope you find what you're looking for. He left without another word, his straight-backed figure dissolving into the growing twilight. Only when he was completely gone did Delilah allow herself to collapse onto the porch steps, silent tears streaming down her face. For 5 days, Delilah threw herself into work, refusing to think about Ethan Yates or the emptiness his absence left. On the 6th day, Mayor Burnside and 2 men in expensive suits arrived at her gate. Miss Prescott, the mayor called, his voice overly cheerful. These gentlemen are from the railroad. They'd like a word. The taller of the 2 stepped forward, removing his hat. Theodore Wilkes, Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. This is my associate, Mr. Harrington. We're surveying possible routes for our expansion. And you're considering my property, Delilah said flatly. Yes, madam. The southern route would require approximately 40 acres of your land, including where we're standing now. She glanced at the house her father had built, the barn where she'd learned to milk cows and birth calves, the oak tree where her mother had been buried. My land is not for sale, she said firmly. Mayor Burnside cleared his throat. Now, Delilah, let's be reasonable. The railroad is offering fair compensation. How much? She interrupted. Mr. Wilkes named a figure that made the mayor's eyebrows rise appreciatively. It was more money than Delilah had ever seen, enough to start over anywhere she chose. As I said, my land is not for sale. Her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. Good day, gentlemen. Miss Prescott, Mr. Harrington spoke for the first time, his tone condescending. You should understand that the railroad has ways of acquiring necessary property if agreements cannot be reached amicably. Are you threatening me, Mr. Harrington? Simply stating facts, madam. Eminent domain exists for the greater good. Aurora stands to benefit tremendously from this railroad connection. Then I suggest you consider the northern route, she replied coldly. Now please leave my property. After they departed, Delilah's hands shook so badly she dropped a precious egg, watching helplessly as it shattered on the barn floor. The railroad would return. They would take her land, her home, her parents' final resting place. The inevitability of it pressed down on her like a physical weight. That afternoon, she rode into town to speak with Judge Parker, hoping he might offer legal advice. As she tied her mare outside his office, she spotted Ethan loading supplies into a wagon outside the livery stable. He looked different, his face harder, more closed. When he glanced up and saw her, he merely nodded once in acknowledgement before returning to his task. The sight of him preparing to leave sent an unexpected panic through her. Before she could reconsider, Delilah crossed the street. "You're leaving Aurora," she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Ethan straightened slowly. "Yes, madam. Heading north to Wyoming Territory. Heard there's work on a cattle operation near Cheyenne." "I see." His eyes studied her face. "I hear the railroad men paid you a visit today." "News travels fast. Small town." He secured a crate in the wagon. "Did you accept their offer?" "No." Something shifted in his expression. "Why not? It was good money." "Some things can't be measured in dollars, Ethan." She hesitated. "When do you leave?" "First light tomorrow." Delilah nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. She turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "They'll take it anyway, you know. The railroad always wins these fights." She faced him again, lifting her chin. "Then they'll have to drag me off my land. I won't give up without a fight." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That sounds like the Delilah Prescott I've come to know. The one you said had strength, determination." The words came out more bitter than she intended. "The very same." His eyes softened. "I meant every word I said that night, Delilah." "Then why are you leaving?" "Because you asked me to go." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me to stay and I will." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. In his eyes, Delilah saw everything she feared to want: commitment, partnership, a future where she wasn't alone. "I can't," she whispered finally, the words catching in her throat. Pain flashed across his face before he masked it. "Then I wish you well, Miss Prescott, truly." This time, she was the one who walked away, each step feeling like a betrayal of something precious she couldn't name. That night, Delilah couldn't sleep. The house seemed emptier than ever, filled with the ghosts of what had been and what might have been. Near dawn, she gave up trying and went to sit on the porch, watching as the eastern sky lightened from black to deep purple to the first hints of pink. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart leap, but it was Sheriff Mills who appeared at her gate, his expression grim. "Miss Prescott," he called, dismounting. "There's been trouble in town. Thought you should know." "What kind of trouble?" "Fight at the saloon last night. Your friend Yates and some railroad men got ugly." Fear clutched at her chest. "Is he hurt?" "Holding his own until one pulled a knife. Cut him pretty bad across the ribs." The sheriff removed his hat. "He's at Doc Wilson's now." "What happened? Why would they fight?" Sheriff Mills looked uncomfortable. "From what witnesses said, they were talking about acquiring your land. Making jokes about a woman trying to stand against the railroad." Yates took exception. Delilah was already moving toward the barn. "I need to saddle my horse." "Miss Prescott," the sheriff called after her. "There's more you should know. Those men, they're not just surveyors. Word is they've been hired to pressure holdouts along the route. They've got a reputation for getting what they want, one way or another." She paused. "Are you saying they might come back, try to force me out?" "I'm saying be careful, and maybe reconsider that offer they made." He replaced his hat. "I'll keep an eye on your place when I can, but I'm just one man." After he left, Delilah moved with purpose, saddling Penny and riding hard for town. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when she tied her mare outside Doc Wilson's small house. The doctor answered her knock, looking unsurprised to see her. "He's resting," he said by way of greeting. "Took 20 stitches to close the wound. He's lucky another inch and we'd be planning a funeral." "May I see him?" Doc Wilson stepped aside. "Back room, don't tire him out." Ethan lay shirtless on a narrow cot, white bandages wrapped around his torso. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. Delilah approached quietly, her heart constricting at the sight of him so still. She sat in the chair beside the cot. uncertain what to do. After a moment, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers were warm, calloused from years of hard work. "You're a fool, Ethan Yates," she whispered, "fighting for a woman who sent you away." His eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her face. "Delilah," his voice was rough with pain. "I'm here." She squeezed his hand. "The sheriff told me what happened." A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Should have seen the other fellow. This isn't a joke. You could have been killed. Wouldn't be the first time I've bled for something worthwhile." He tried to shift position and winced. "Stay still," she ordered. "Why would you do something so reckless?" His eyes held her steadily. "They were planning to burn you out, Delilah. Said if you wouldn't sell willingly, they'd make sure you had nothing left to sell." Cold fear washed through her. "When?" "Tonight, after midnight." He gripped her hand tighter. "You can't go back there alone. It's my home, Ethan. Everything I have left of my parents is there." "Then I'm coming with you." He struggled to sit up. "You're in no condition to go anywhere." She pressed him gently back against the pillows. "Doc Wilson said you need rest." "What I need," he said, his voice stronger, "is to know you're safe. Those men won't stop, Delilah, not until they get what they want." She stood abruptly. "Then maybe I should give them what they want." "What do you mean?" "I'll accept their offer. Sell the land." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "No." Ethan shook his head. "Not like this, not because you're afraid." "What choice do I have? Fight them and lose everything? At least this way I get something for my parents' sacrifice." "There's always a choice." He captured her hand again. "We'll figure this out together. Just promise me you won't go back alone." The concern in his eyes, the "we" that fell so easily from his lips, broke something inside her. Tears she'd held back for years threatened to spill over. "I don't know how to let someone help me," she whispered. "I've been alone so long. You're not alone anymore." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Not if you don't want to be." Before she could respond, Doc Wilson appeared in the doorway. "Miss Prescott, there's someone here asking for you. Says it's urgent." It was Mayor Burnside, his usual bluster subdued. "Miss Prescott, I've just received alarming information. The men from the railroad, they're not acting with official sanction. The company sent telegrams disavowing their actions." "What does that mean?" she asked, though she already knew. "It means they're land speculators using the railroad's name to intimidate people into selling cheap. They've done this before in other towns." He shifted uncomfortably. "I should have verified their credentials more thoroughly. I'm sorry." From the cot, Ethan's voice cut in. "Does the sheriff know?" "He's forming a posse now," the mayor confirmed. "But Miss Prescott, you shouldn't return to your ranch. These men are dangerous. They've likely realized their scheme is exposed and might act rashly." "My parents are buried on that land," Delilah said firmly. "I won't abandon them." Ethan was already sitting up, his face pale but determined. "Get me my shirt, Doc. I'm leaving." "You'll tear those stitches," Doc Wilson protested. "Better than what will happen if those men reach Delilah's ranch before we do." Within the hour, a hastily assembled posse of 8 men rode out of Aurora toward the Prescott ranch. Despite Doc Wilson's objections, Ethan rode among them, his jaw set against the pain of his wound. Sheriff Mills led the group, with Delilah keeping pace beside Ethan. "You should have stayed in town," Ethan told her as they rode. "It's not safe." "It's my fight," she replied simply. "Has been since they first set eyes on my land." They arrived at the ranch to find smoke already rising from the barn. 3 men on horseback were circling the structure, torches in hand. One had dismounted and was approaching the house with a kerosene can. "That's far enough," Sheriff Mills called, his rifle raised. "Drop those torches and put your hands where I can see them." The men turned, momentarily startled. Then the leader, Harrington, smiled coldly. "Sheriff, this is a private business matter. I suggest you and your men turn around. Burning down a woman's property isn't business," the sheriff replied. "It's arson and attempted murder." Harrington's eyes narrowed as he spotted Delilah. "Miss Prescott, come to watch the show. We gave you a chance to be reasonable." Ethan moved his horse forward, positioning himself between Delilah and Harrington. "Your railroad scheme is exposed. Real representatives from Denver are on their way to meet with the town council. It's over." For a moment, tension crackled in the air like the flames licking at the barn's edge. Then Harrington dropped the kerosene can and drew his pistol in one fluid motion. "Wilkes, Johnson, take care of them." Gunfire erupted as Delilah's world exploded into chaos. She saw Ethan dive from his horse, tackling her to the ground as bullets whizzed overhead. The sheriff and his men returned fire, forcing Harrington and his companions to seek cover. "Stay down," Ethan shouted above the din, shielding her body with his own. She could feel warm wetness spreading across his shirt. His wound had reopened. "You're bleeding," she gasped. "I'll live." His eyes were intense on hers. "If anything happens to me, run for the creek bed. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely. A stray bullet splintered the fence post beside them. Ethan pulled Delilah tighter against him as they crawled toward the relative safety of a water trough. The gunfight seemed to last forever, though in reality it was over in minutes. When the shots finally ceased, Delilah raised her head cautiously. Two of Harrington's men lay motionless on the ground. Harrington himself was sitting in the dirt, clutching a bleeding arm as Sheriff Mills stood over him, rifle aimed at his chest. "It's over," the sheriff called. "Everyone all right?" Slowly, people emerged from various hiding places. One of the posse members had taken a bullet to the shoulder. Another had a bloody graze across his cheek, but they were alive. Ethan sat up with a grimace, his shirt now soaked with blood. "The barn," he said, looking toward the structure where flames were beginning to take serious hold. "My father built that barn," Delilah whispered, watching as her past burned before her eyes. The men quickly organized a bucket brigade from the well, working desperately to contain the fire before it could spread to the house. Ethan tried to rise to help them but stumbled, his face gray with pain and blood loss. "Don't you dare," Delilah said, forcing him to sit back down. She tore strips from her petticoat to make fresh bandages. "You've done enough heroics for one day." "Not enough," he murmured, watching the men fight the fire. "I promised I'd help you save this place." "You did save it," she told him, pressing the cloth against his wound. "You saved me." By sunset, the immediate danger had passed. The barn was a total loss, but the house and other outbuildings had been spared. Sheriff Mills had taken Harrington and his surviving accomplice back to town to face charges. The posse members had helped extinguish the last of the embers before departing, leaving Delilah and Ethan alone. Doc Wilson had come and gone, redoing Ethan's stitches and leaving strict instructions that he wasn't to be moved for at least 2 days. Delilah made up a bed for him in the small parlor, ignoring his protests that he could return to town. "You can barely stand," she pointed out as she helped him to the makeshift bed. "Besides, I'm not letting you out of my sight until I'm certain you won't do anything else foolish. Like getting stabbed defending your honor or shot protecting your property." Despite his pain, his eyes held a warmth that made her flush. "Some things are worth the risk, Delilah." She busied herself adjusting his pillows. "Why did you really come back, after I sent you away?" "I never left," he admitted. "Couldn't bring myself to go, even though I was loading that wagon to leave. Something told me you might need me." "I didn't need you," she said softly, "but I wanted you to stay." His hand caught hers, stilling her nervous movements. "Then say it now." "Ask me to stay, Delilah." She really looked at him, this man who had walked into her life and refused to accept the walls she'd built around her heart, who had bled to protect what was hers. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of believing again. Of hoping." Her voice caught. "Of losing someone else I care about." "Hope died long ago," she murmured, the admission painful in its honesty. "When they buried my father, they buried my ability to believe in anything good." Ethan's hand came up to touch her cheek. "Then let me bring it back to life," he whispered. "One day at a time. Together." The tenderness in his voice undid her last defenses. Tears she'd held back for years finally spilled over as Delilah allowed herself to feel everything she'd locked away: grief, fear, loneliness, and underneath it all, a fragile, newborn hope. "Stay," she said finally, her voice trembling but certain. "Not because I need you, but because I want you here, because this place feels like home again when you're in it." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Yes, madam." Recovery came slowly for both Ethan and the ranch. True representatives from the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad arrived the following week, apologetic for the actions of the imposters who had used their name. They were indeed considering a southern route, but assured Delilah that any land acquisition would be handled legally and fairly. To their surprise, Delilah and Ethan presented them with an alternative proposal. The railroad could cross the far northern corner of her property, leaving the house, family cemetery, and best grazing land intact. In exchange, they would pay fair market value for the acreage and build a small depot where local ranchers could more easily ship cattle to market. "This could work," the railroad man admitted, studying their crude map. "Saves us having to cut through the ridge to the south." "And preserves a historic homestead," Ethan added, his hand steady on Delilah's shoulder. "The Prescott legacy deserves to continue." As spring turned to summer, changes came to the Prescott ranch. The money from the railroad allowed for repairs long overdue, new cattle to rebuild the herd, and hired hands to help with the increasing workload. The burned barn was replaced with a larger, sturdier structure that Ethan designed himself. One evening, as they sat on the newly rebuilt porch watching the sunset, Ethan took Delilah's hand. In the 4 months since the shootout, their relationship had deepened into something neither had dared name aloud, though everyone in Aurora spoke of them as a pair. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "about the future." "What about it?" she asked, though her racing heart suggested she already knew. "I was wondering if you might consider changing the name of this place." Delilah turned to him, surprised. "Change it?" "From Prescott Ranch. But my father would want you to be happy," Ethan finished gently. "And I was thinking Yates might sound good alongside Prescott. Prescott Yates Ranch has a certain ring to it." Understanding dawned slowly. "Ethan Yates, are you proposing to me?" He smiled, pulling a small object from his pocket. "Not very well, apparently." He slid from the chair to kneel before her. "Delilah Prescott, I love you. I've loved you since you brought me bitter coffee and tried to convince me you were better off alone. I want to build a life with you on this land, if you'll have me." The ring was simple, a gold band with a small sapphire that caught the fading sunlight, but to Delilah, it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy replacing those of sorrow that had been her companions for so long. "Yes, I'll have you." They were married in September as the aspens in the distant mountains turned gold against the blue Colorado sky. The entire town of Aurora turned out for the ceremony, held under the old oak tree where Delilah's parents rested. Sheriff Mills gave the bride away, and Doc Wilson stood as Ethan's best man. "I never thought I'd smile again in this place," Delilah said as they danced under lantern light that evening. You changed everything, Ethan. We changed it together, he corrected, holding her close. And we're just getting started. Winter came early that year, blanketing the plains in white. The railroad construction had paused until spring, but the small depot near the property line was already taking shape. Inside the warm ranch house, Delilah and Ethan faced the season with well-stocked pantries and a love that deepened with each passing day. Christmas Eve brought a blizzard that howled around the house like a living thing, but inside, all was warmth and light. Delilah had baked her mother's special cinnamon bread, and Ethan had surprised her with a piano, a luxury she'd mentioned once in passing as something her mother had played. "I can't even play," she protested, running her fingers reverently over the polished wood. "Then we'll learn together," he said, pulling her onto the bench beside him. "We have time." As the snow fell outside, they picked out simple melodies, laughing at their mistakes and starting over. Later, they lay before the fireplace on a nest of blankets, Ethan's arms wrapped securely around her. "You remember what you said to me that night?" Delilah asked, her head resting on his chest. "After I told you hope had died for me." "I said I'd bring it back to life," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You did." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "More than you know." It took him a moment to understand, and when he did, his eyes widened with wonder. "A baby, you're certain?" Doc Wilson confirmed it yesterday. "Early summer, he thinks." Ethan gathered her closer, his joy too great for words. They lay together in silence, watching the firelight dance across the walls of the home they'd saved together. Spring brought new life to the Prescott Yates ranch. Green grass carpeted the plains. New calves wobbled alongside their mothers, and the railroad tracks gleamed in the Colorado sunshine as they stretched toward the horizon. The depot was completed just in time for the first train's arrival in May, bringing supplies, mail, and new possibilities to Aurora. In June, as wildflowers painted the prairie in a riot of colors, Delilah gave birth to a son they named James Thomas Yates, James for her father, Thomas for Ethan's brother who hadn't survived the war. "He has your eyes," Ethan whispered, holding his son with a reverence that brought tears to Delilah's eyes, "and hopefully your good sense. With your courage," she added, "and stubborn determination." As summer ripened into autumn once more, the ranch prospered beyond their expectations. The cattle herd had tripled, and the new railway connection meant better prices at market. They hired 3 permanent ranch hands and added a new wing to the house to accommodate their growing family. One evening, as Delilah nursed little James on the porch while Ethan worked on plans for a new corral, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "I used to sit here alone, watching the sun set, wondering how much longer I could hold on," she said softly. Feeling like each day was just an exercise in delaying the inevitable. Ethan set down his pencil and moved to sit beside her, his arm slipping around her shoulders. "And now I watch the sun set knowing it will rise again tomorrow, bringing new possibilities." She smiled down at their son, his tiny hand clutching her finger as he nursed. "I never imagined I could be this happy again." "That's the thing about hope," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Once it takes root, it's stronger than any weed, harder to kill than you'd think." "Especially when it has someone fighting for it," she agreed, leaning into his embrace. As if understanding he was being discussed, James released his hold on Delilah's breast and yawned enormously, his tiny face scrunching up in a gesture so reminiscent of his father that both parents laughed. "I believe our son has decided it's bedtime," Ethan said, carefully taking the baby from Delilah's arms. "Come on, little man. Time to rest so you can help your pa with ranch work tomorrow." Delilah watched them go inside, her heart so full it felt impossible to contain. 3 years ago, she had been a woman barely existing, going through the motions of life while feeling nothing but emptiness. Now her days were filled with purpose, her nights with love, and her future with promise. Later that night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Ethan's arms wrapped securely around her, Delilah whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" he murmured sleepily. "For not giving up on me. For seeing something worth fighting for when all I could see was what I'd lost." He pulled her closer, his lips finding hers in the darkness. "I'll never give up on you, Delilah Yates, not in this life or any other." The years passed, each one bringing new challenges and joys to the Prescott Yates ranch. Little James grew from a toddling boy into a sturdy child with his father's adventurous spirit and his mother's thoughtful nature. He was joined by a sister, Elizabeth Rose, when he was 3, and another brother, Samuel, 2 years after that. The railroad brought growth to Aurora, transforming it from a struggling settlement into a prosperous town. The depot near their property became a hub for local commerce, and Ethan's careful management turned their ranch into one of the most successful operations in the county. Delilah found purpose beyond motherhood and ranch work. She started a small school for the children of ranchers too far from town for daily travel, teaching in a converted bunkhouse 3 days a week. The joy of sharing knowledge, of watching young minds blossom under her care, filled a space in her heart she hadn't known was empty. One bright autumn morning, nearly 10 years after Ethan had first arrived in Aurora, Delilah stood at her parents' graves beneath the oak tree. The simple markers had been replaced with proper headstones, and fresh flowers brightened the small fenced area. "I wish you could have met them," she said softly to the quiet stones. "Your grandchildren, Ethan, the life we've built here." A gentle hand touched her shoulder. Ethan stood behind her, his face lined now with a decade of Colorado sun and wind, but his eyes still holding the same warmth that had first broken through her defenses. "They know," he said simply. "I believe they know." She leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Sometimes I worry that I'll forget them. The sound of Mother's laugh, the way Father's eyes crinkled when he smiled." "Then we'll keep telling their stories," Ethan promised. "To the children, to their children someday, the Prescott legacy will continue." From the direction of the house came the sound of childish laughter. James, now 9, was chasing his siblings across the yard while their new puppy barked excitedly around their feet. "We should get back," Delilah said, smiling at the scene. Elizabeth was determined to help bake bread today, and Samuel can only be trusted with the chickens for so long. As they walked hand in hand toward their home, Ethan asked, "Do you ever regret it, staying here when you could have taken the railroad money and started fresh somewhere else?" Delilah considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "This land holds my history, but more importantly, it holds our future." She squeezed his hand. Hope couldn't have taken root anywhere else quite the same way. "Speaking of taking root," Ethan said, guiding her toward a section of land beyond the corral, "I've been thinking about that southern pasture. The soil's good there. For what? We're running as many cattle as the land can sustain already." His smile held a hint of mystery. "Not for cattle. For apples. Your father once mentioned wanting an orchard, remember? I found his notes in that old journal last winter." Emotion welled in Delilah's throat. "You'd plant an orchard after all this time? Why not? James is old enough to help now. In 5 years, we could be harvesting our first serious crop. In 10, we could supply half the county." The image bloomed in her mind, rows of apple trees in spring blossom, their children climbing branches heavy with fruit, future grandchildren carrying on the tradition they would begin. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. An orchard, Father would have loved that. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table in the home that had seen so much loss and so much love, Delilah looked at the faces surrounding her Ethan at the head of the table, their children bright-eyed and healthy, the ranch hands who had become like family, and felt a completeness she had once thought impossible. Later, as she and Ethan stood on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the Colorado sky, he pulled her close against the evening chill. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. "You know, there were days I couldn't imagine surviving until sunset, let alone finding joy again. Hope is resilient that way," he said, "even when we think it's died completely." "Hope died long ago," she murmured, echoing words spoken a decade before, but now without their bitter edge. "But you brought it back to life. Every day you still do." His kiss was gentle, familiar yet still thrilling after all their years together. "That goes both ways, Delilah Yates. You saved me as surely as I saved you." As darkness fell over the Prescott Yates ranch, lights glowed warmly in windows that had once stood dark and empty. Inside, a family's laughter echoed in rooms that had known only silence. Outside, the land that had almost been lost stretched peaceful and secure into the distance, ready for whatever the future might bring. Hope, once rekindled, had grown into something stronger than either of them could have imagined alone, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, living on in the land they had fought for, and the family they had created together.